I was so blessed to work in my hometown as the main weekday anchor for 21 years, but I had another full-time job, managing disrespect, inequitable treatment, mental and physical abuse, microaggressions, gaslighting, and more in the workplace. Millions of people are working in hostile environments, so let's discuss intentional solutions to improve the culture so we all can thrive. To save my life and soul, I walked away on June 5th, 2020. I sued the company, but rejected the settlement offer to maintain my right to tell the story, the truth, to help others, because my silence is not for sale. Hi everybody, I'm Andrea Moorhead, and I really want to thank you in advance for listening and joining this community with the sole purpose of supporting one another so that all of us can live out loud by always speaking our truth, because the truth will set us free. You know, this moment has been a long time coming, and at every utterance, I really feel the weight of my traumatic past finally being overshadowed by my sincere desire to use this forum to save others. I know there are millions of people who are exhausted. We are tired of being exhausted by toxicity in the workplace. In fact, when it was time to return to the workplace full-time post-COVID, many of us were like, no, thank you, because maybe you realized you didn't want to put up with the microaggressions, the gaslighting, the lies, the disparate treatment in the workplace. Because at home, you finally feel at peace, right? No wonder 50% of Americans are now working remotely. This new normal is working. And the main reason is because of workplace trauma. Hostility and toxicity is non-existent, for the most part, in your own home. No longer are we sitting in the office parking lot, and maybe this might be you. You're praying before you walk into the stressful workplace. In fact, I probably see some of your hands already raised in the air with affirmation. That is the reason for this YouTube page, as well as the podcast, because I was one of the millions of people in this nation and around the world who feel, or should I say felt, devalued in the workplace. And you might be at your wit's end trying to figure out, how do I navigate this environment? Maybe you're even entertaining the scary proposition of leaving, and you're thinking, how is that going to work? But I am a living example that there is indeed hope. I will share all the details of what I experienced in the world of television news and how it mirrors millions of other people who feel trapped in the cycle of workplace abuse. You may be saying, well, that's a strong word, abuse. Sadly, it is the truth. When you're not able to be your authentic self, when you know you're not being valued, not respected, you're not being treated fairly, and in my case, also physically accosted by a manager not once but twice, there's no sugarcoating the truth. It is indeed abuse. And I say thank you to my therapist for helping me to finally understand that going to working with certain people, not everyone, but I was working in an abusive environment. I was maintaining an abusive relationship. So we're going to educate ourselves about this unfortunately burgeoning problem. I will be using my story and the stories of others as well. As you can imagine, these are very uncomfortable conversations, but they are desperately needed so that the egregious behaviors will cease, so that the offenders will finally be held accountable, and for workplace leaders to create a culture where everyone can thrive, which is our birthright. I recognize this platform is worldwide, but I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the thousands of people over my 35-year career. You invited me into your homes. From Washington, D.C., to Worcester, Massachusetts, to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and my hometown of Indianapolis, Indiana, for 21 years there alone. It was truly my honor to serve you and to serve those phenomenal communities, and I thank you. specifically for the Indianapolis community. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye in a way that truly, truly represents my sincere gratitude for your support. You know, when I think about it, you really watched me grow up. You watched me grow up. When I was 29 years old when I first walked into the newsroom there. You watched me grow up from a wide-eyed 29-year-old embarking on a new career journey to getting married in my late 30s and then having our unexpected blessing of a baby who is now 16 years old. You were there for me for my international travels to Africa, where I covered the AIDS epidemic, to Australia, when I went back in 2000 to cover the Olympics. You watched me also field anchor so many different stories, including a presidential inauguration, a Final Four, and the NBA Finals. You've seen the many hairstyles over the years as well. Some, oh my goodness, that I wish I could get a do-over, literally get a do-over, because those dudes were not cute, but I thank you in spite of. And you also were there when I faced the biggest challenge of my life, which was the breast cancer diagnosis in 2018. You were there for me as well. At every turn, you were there for me. The kind words in the restaurants, striking up a conversation in my favorite TJ Maxx store or Marshall's. Y'all saw me. Maybe even at the drive-through window at the Starbucks when I was picking up my chai tea lattes pretty much every day. Regardless of where I was, wherever I was, you were there with the smiles, the hugs, the cards, the flowers. I mean, really everything. And that kindness will forever hold a special place in my heart, as well in the hearts of my family members. I also want to say that I'm sorry. I am so sorry that my departure was swift and that it was abrupt. And it really made many of you kind of really concerned about my health because you thought it was related to my cancer diagnosis. Well, thankfully it was not, due to a recurrence of triple negative breast cancer. Thank God I am still in remission. But I never could have imagined that I would have to walk away from a career, from my job, from the love of my life, from the love of Indianapolis, to save my life, as well as the lives of my family, because my mental health was suffering. When I say that I was over the edge, I was over the edge. I pray that as you listen to my story, the truth of what I have been silently suffering from for over 15 years, and hear the stories from others with similar experiences, that you will understand the severity of workplace trauma and abuse, and how both are offensive to humanity. This healing journey, both physical and mental, has been the biggest challenge of my life. And to do so in the public eye has been excruciatingly painful. In fact, one of the hallmark rules of journalism, if you will, in this business is that you're not the story, meaning I'm not the story. My job is to share your stories. It's not about me. I've been asked by people, what's the greatest and the biggest story of your career? And honestly, I've never really been able to answer that. I tell them, oh, this story when I went to Australia, or that story when I went to DC, or whatever it is. But I've never really answered that question. I never could put it in a category of the best or the biggest. I can honestly say that this is the biggest story of my life. My story. And I have to tell you that this is a very uncomfortable scenario for me to be in, because I've always been kind of a private person, somewhat, believe it or not, of an introvert at times. And yet, here I am, on display in my own living room at home, with my story for others to maybe judge the merits of what I share. But here we are. Here we are because I answered the call of something greater than myself, so that I can be part of a collective movement to save others from waiting too long to get help, waiting too long to make a change, and waiting too long to thrive. Let me be clear. While some may be listening to hear the sordid salacious details of who did what to whom. I understand. I understand the salaciousness, if you will, of it. It does exist. I mean, it does read, if you all have been following me on social media, so some of the things I've already shared, it does read like maybe episodes from the TV show The Newsroom. But this is not a show. These are real people, real stories, who were hoping for real change. The purpose is not to shame anyone or call people out for their misdeeds and their unconscionable behavior. The purpose is to use my experience and the real experiences of others to shine a big light, a bright light on this pervasive problem of bullying, gaslighting, microaggressions, discrimination, and yes, even racism in the workplace, so that all of us can do better. We must do better. For the past 2 years, I've been dropping a few nuggets, few examples of some of these issues as they relate to my situation, as I mentioned on social media. And it became clear that these uncomfortable conversations and even discussions of solutions are desperately needed. It became clear that some folks love and they support you when it doesn't require them to look at the man or the woman in the mirror to see where they may have been wrong or even failed. Here's an example. A woman on Instagram made a comment on one of my posts that I had made about workplace hostility, saying, I loved watching you. I'm just interpreting how she might have sounded, but she was like, I loved watching you, and I'm so happy that you're happy now. But, are you ready for this? Just drop the race card. That still stings. It still stings. And it actually hurts, but it's less painful now because I have the courage to talk about it. That post received the most comments of any of my IG posts over the last, 10 years that I've been using it. And I respectfully responded. I said, there's no such thing as a race card. You know, that phrase is often used to demean and maybe sometimes nullify someone's personal experience. But what you're really saying is that you refuse to open your mind and your heart to the sufferings of others. The so-called race card is racism. We're seeing these cultural wars being played out all over the world, the need and desire to oppress others. I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted of spending precious time here on earth, mired in the messiness of people clamoring for power to lord over others. This sounds really simple. Can we all just get along? That really is the foundation of this YouTube page and the podcast, My Silence Is Not for Sale, so that we can have a real discussion about how the love of power, money, and control is at the center of the many ills of society, which drive our decision-making and how we treat other people. The very essence of workplace hostility, microaggressions, gaslighting, and similar traumas are abuses against one's humanity. That's what we're really talking about here, humanity. But we have the power to change so that everyone can thrive, everyone. Why wouldn't we want that for everyone? I always say there's enough proverbial food, if you will, to go around so that everyone has an opportunity to have a seat at the table and to be fed. You know, we've been hearing a lot lately about the 3 words, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's taken quite a hit, a negative hit lately. And in all truth and honesty, it's because there are people who are in control who don't want to face themselves and be honest with who they are and how they've behaved, because the truth might hurt. But if no one takes personal inventory about their actions, if people fail to hold themselves accountable, and maybe leaders fail to hold other people accountable, if people fail to do the necessary work to change, then positive improvement will never happen, individually nor collectively. DEI simply means being intentional to level the playing field, because those in power have intentionally excluded people. That's the truth. The truth is, we're also talking about power. Power can be used for good. It can also be used, as we all know, for bad. My story is one of how power was used to marginalize, manipulate, gaslight, and even to break me. It was purposeful, it was intentional, and it was done to exact a very specific reason to be discussed on a future episode. But what they failed to realize is that my battle with cancer opened up my eyes and my heart to not fear anything or anyone. Because you see, God gave me a second chance to live. As I was going through chemo and the surgery and the radiation and even another long year of immunotherapy treatments, I had a lot of time to think about, how am I going to live life when I get out of this? God, you're going to give me a second chance in life. How do I want to live? Because I was dying and I didn't want to die from the workplace or because of the workplace. I was not going to come out on the other side of winning back my health to return to the workplace only to lose my soul. You see, what they failed to realize is that triple negative breast cancer, which is the most aggressive form, especially for Black women, with a high reoccurrence rate, the cancer made me stronger. While they were hoping that I would never return, and I know that, you were hoping I would never return because that would make your agenda a little easier to fulfill. I know it. Without your conscious and deliberate and unconscionable actions at hand, I came back bolder than ever. But before I gained the strength to walk away, again I tell you, my soul was indeed broken. I will share with you all of the shenanigans, the tomfoolery, the craziness that happened to really help assist you in assessing your own workplace, really any environment, and even relationships, to decide if and when it's time to walk away. And that's okay. Now, again, we can all agree that no one is perfect. I'm not perfect. No one is perfect. We all make mistakes, right? We do make missteps in life. But what I say is, when you make a mistake, own it. When you make a mistake, hold yourself accountable. When you make a mistake, apologize so that you can learn a lesson, and we all can learn lessons, and we all can heal, and we all can challenge ourselves to do better moving forward. But when there are intentional roadblocks set up to intentionally prevent you from thriving, we've now entered a territory of abuse. I had never been to therapy in my entire life. And at 50 years of age, I had to go to therapy because I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do. And when my therapist called my experiences that I shared with her over 2 years, when she said, "You have been experiencing classic abuse," that's when I realized that it was time to go. I say this in jest, but I'm being serious here. I clearly heard Whoopi Goldberg, her line in Ghost, say, "Girl, you're in danger." I was literally in danger. Like many people who have been victims of abuse of any kind, we ask ourselves, what did I do to cause this mistreatment? You start playing the personal blame game. You're thinking, is there something that I did or didn't do to deserve this? This is maybe all my fault. You are trying to make sense of it all, but in your heart, you really know the real reason. But you don't want to give that any energy because after all, we were taught, and I still believe that I will be treated fairly, that my stellar commitment to my job will be recognized and rewarded, that I will be promoted and given a raise like everyone else. But here's the truth. When the rules change, not in your favor, when it's time for your glow up, how do you make the egregious behaviors in the workplace make sense? What do you tell yourself, trying to make it make sense? You dare not think it's because you're a woman. You dare not think it's because you have a disability. And you dare not think it's because of the color of your skin. But those are very real and very painful possibilities. When all you wanted was to simply be treated fairly based on nothing more but your proven ability to succeed. Again, if there's any resistance to identifying the truth of a matter, you are dismissing and disrespecting someone's experience. And trust me, no one wants this experience. No one. Nor would I wish it on anyone else, which is why I am speaking out. I have thought very long and very hard about why. How do I answer the why? Why was I treated differently? And again, let me be clear. People aren't hoping and praying to be marginalized so they can claim racism or discrimination of any kind. Think about it. What do people gain by speaking up? If no one, meaning managers, supervisors, even co-workers, and human resources departments, if they won't listen nor support them by holding people accountable and making changes, what do the people who speak up, what do we gain by speaking up? I can tell you what I met on the receiving end. I was branded as a troublemaker, lied on about my work ethic, despite having stellar reviews every year. I was punished by taking completed stories away from me, not airing completed stories, and giving me nonsensical excuses by the news director and others as to why. Here's the straw, the final small straw that broke the camel's back when I said, I'm out of here. When managers were talking about me negatively in emails, in an email that was mistakenly sent to me. What I always thought was true. And even coworkers making bets about whether or not I would show up to work after my cancer treatments. It happened. And there's more that will be shared over time. But again, I raise the question, what did I gain by standing up for myself and asking for people to be held accountable? I wasn't protected. It wasn't a safe place. And the people who could have stopped it and done something failed to do so. They made a choice. So when people stand up to institutions and people in power, they do everything possible to ruin your life while you're there and even after you leave. Here's what happened to me. Before I get there, let me tell you, I received hundreds of emails and even messages from people who, after hearing my story 2 years ago, were in a similar situation. And they told me they couldn't find a job for many years to come after it all happened because negative feedback was given from their former employers to the potential new employer. They were tagged in their industry as being a whistleblower and no one would hire them. They lost their homes because they didn't have a livelihood anymore. They were unemployed for so long. They were forced to work in places they never thought they would have to, or do things they never thought they would have to do because they needed money to live and to survive. Because employers in their industry ghosted them after finding out they filed a lawsuit against their former employer. Some of these people are still haunted by the trauma They still have nightmares. They're barely sleeping, including myself. I'm still trying to get a good night's sleep. And above it all, on top of it all, their mental and physical health, both adversely affected. Again, that's been my experience, including being followed around by a private investigator during the litigation process to intimidate me. In fact, he attended a book signing for my children's book, co-authored with my father. And if you, the investigator, are listening, you got to do a better job of blending in with the crowd and actually look interested. It was the spirit of discernment that sniffed you out. These are traumas that stay with you forever. The conversations that many are having on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, they are filtered with stories and even comments about improving workplace culture. Thousands of likes, people sharing their own battles. But what I rarely see anyone talking about what's the solution. What's the solution to improving workplace trauma, workplace abuse, workplace hostility? What's the solution? How do we hold people accountable? Why don't we hold people accountable? How can we prevent having a toxic workplace? What are the company owners and the managers? What are they actively doing and communicating with their staff about fair and equitable treatment? That's right. Some of them are part of the problem. For some reason, there's this belief that maybe competition in the workplace makes employees work harder. Think about it. If you're in essence creating an atmosphere that winning by any means necessary will be rewarded, and as long as you are performing and as long as you're making money for the company, then anything goes, because at the end of the day, we're making money. And we know that is kind of the cog in the wheel. That's what business is all about. But my question is, why do we continue to have a seat at the table with rotten apples? The rotten apples infect the good ones. This YouTube page, this YouTube show, the podcast, My Silence is Not for Sale, aims to discuss how best to eliminate toxic workplace culture and to really put tangible tools and even updated laws in place to adequately address the isms of society. And we all know what the isms are. So some of the themes we're going to be discussing obviously include workplace trauma and abuse, but more specific issues like favoritism, manipulation, implicit bias, PTSD, competitiveness, therapy, and so much more. I will continue to share my story forever. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to share it because I really want it to serve as a backdrop for themes and conversations with victims, mental health and family therapists, sociologists, and even legal experts. Legally speaking, I will share all of the details, many of them, which are outlined in depositions, so that we can really demonstrate and prove how the truth sometimes is not the goal of defendants or the employer. They don't want to discuss and deal with the truth. Their role is to deny any responsibility. Their goal is to mitigate their financial liability, have you sign a non-disclosure agreement, prevent you from ever saying anything about the case or your experience. Well, that's my dog barking there. He sees a squirrel outside. Well, they must have forgotten I'm an old school journalist, where I still believe that our important role is to hold a light to the darkness, to uncover the truth, and to hold people and institutions accountable. I want you to know that this environment that I am creating, it is a safe place. It's a safe place for honest and uncomfortable conversations, which is okay. It's okay to have an uncomfortable conversation so that we all can learn and grow and be better. We're going to talk about it all. Workplace trauma, abuse, toxicity. And again, I thank you in advance for your support because I truly believe that collectively we make substantive changes to improve everyone's lives. One of my dear friends gave me what has really become one of my favorite books. And I'm sure you probably have heard of it, or maybe you even have read it yourself. And it's called Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement by late Congressman John Lewis. While we know about his impact in the civil rights movement and even beyond, his memoir is what I like to call a love letter to all of us. It's a love letter about having courage. Having courage, which I have learned can be a very lonely place. His book is over 500 pages, and in the first paragraph of page 64, my journey, this journey, and why I'm here was affirmed. I was on the beach reading, and when I read this on page 64, my journey was affirmed by his explanation of why he felt compelled to risk his life for the benefit of you, of me, of others. We can all talk about what we want to change, but what are we doing? What are we intentionally doing to elicit positive change? Thank you, Rico. In other words, don't just talk about it. Let's bark about it. Let's be about it. Because if you're not going to be about it, if you're not going to talk about it, if you're not going to bark about it, you are a walking contradiction. Your words mean nothing. I had the honor of meeting and introducing John Lewis at an event in Indianapolis at the King Kennedy Park. He hadn't been there since the night that he was with Bobby Kennedy, who, as we know, was seeking to run for president of the U.S. And on this night at that park, during a campaign rally, John Lewis and Kennedy, they had just found out and had to deliver the news to the crowd that Dr. King had been assassinated. They are credited with keeping the city calm while other cities across the nation understandably saw widespread riots. Back to page 64 to explain why he was so entrenched in the movement for equity and justice back then and until the very end. From after Martin Luther King Jr. died to the very end, despite the real danger for having courage to stand up and challenge the powers that be. He writes, quote, I began believing in what I call the spirit of history. Others might call it fate or destiny or a guiding hand. Whatever it is called, I came to believe that this force is on the side of what is good, of what is right and just. It is the essence of the moral force of the universe. And at certain points in the flow of human existence and circumstances, this force, this spirit, it finds you or it selects you. It chases you down and you have no choice. You must allow yourself to be used, to be guided by this one force, this force to carry out what must be done. To me, that concept of surrender, of giving yourself over to something so much larger than yourself, is the basis of what we call faith. And it is the most crucial step toward opening yourself to the spirit of history. It is a process of giving over one's very being to whatever the role history chooses for you. End quote. There is no doubt in my mind that I was chosen for such a time as this. Other victims, therapists, people I've already spoken to for this podcast, they have been chosen. They all say they were chosen for this moment. Having cancer prepared me to relentlessly fight to live. You are handcuffed to courage. You choose courage over comfort. Courage sleeps with you. Courage travels with you. Courage goes before you. It prepares a place for you to speak truth to power. Courage helps you move through life authentically. Courage is liberating. There's no miscommunication. Courage gives you that unbought and unbossed state of mind. Courage is freedom. Nothing is lost when you stay honest. Authenticity and integrity always wins. Having courage can be a very lonely place, but I can tell you I sleep well at night because I know that I made the right decision for myself and for my family. To those coworkers who intentionally were part of the egregious behaviors, for those people who intentionally set up roadblocks for me to fail, all four of you, the former general manager, the current general manager, the former news director, human resources VP, all of you who lied during the depositions and you couldn't recall substantive facts, I forgive you. But I will never, ever forget. But most importantly, I thank you because you served as footstools to freedom. You pushed me into the best chapter of my life. The spirit of history called me. And I look forward to sharing more details of my story along the way with substantive solutions from victims and experts. I ask that you please share this podcast with your family and your friends. And if you have a story, your story that you would like to share, maybe you're an expert in the mental health, human resources, or even legal fields and more, contact me at info@mysilenceisnotforsale.com. Again, the purpose of the podcast and the YouTube show is to give you strength. Give you strength to choose courage over comfort, to speak your truth, to stand up against workplace abuse, and by all means, to protect your peace. I thank you so much for listening. And again, I say, together, we can make a positive difference to make it better for ourselves and for the next generation. In this podcast show and YouTube show, I will always close with these words of affirmation because I believe someone watching needs to hear this. If no one else believes your experience, I do. I see you and I hear you. And thriving in life is your birthright. Please be well and share wellness.